So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We hope your day started well. My name is Gabriela Masfarré, and together with my colleagues Naomi and Gay, we are orchestrating the Community of Practice for the Healthy Communities Initiative. And we are very excited to be back with all of you after the summer break and to host this conversation that feels so timely and so relevant. Before we start, we just want to share with you, like always, a couple of reminders. So basically, you can see and you can hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. So if you have any tech issues, questions, or things you want to share with the team, please make sure that you share them through the chat. Also, this session is available in English and in French. So if you want to access the French interpretation, you will see that in the bottom of your screen, there is a globe. And you can click there in order to switch to the French channel so that you can follow the session in French. Also, with the purpose of making this session as interactive as possible, we will share with you through the chat an open note-taking document where every one of you can share links, can share resources, can share a bit more about what they do, where are they based. And the idea is basically that we have a space where we can get to know each other a bit better. And although being online makes things a bit cold, we can kind of like feel the warmth of the whole group. Before we start and before introducing today's session, we want to take a moment to recognize the ongoing impacts of colonization and the fact that reconciliation is an ongoing commitment in all of us. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live, to congregate, to learn, and to work on this territory as community builders. And we commit to taking care of the land and all the beings with whom we share it. We want to acknowledge that today we are hosting the session on from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. CUI's work, the Canadian Urban Institute's work, happens across Turtle Island, which has traditionally been and is the home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. So what's today's session all about? We all know that accountability and measurement processes can sometimes feel abstract and disconnected to the actual work that we do on the ground. Nevertheless, we know that they are key to help us measure and also to make visible things that we care about, and also to make visible those realities that otherwise might remain invisible or be silenced. So today's session will be an opportunity to reflect on how evaluation can help advance the work that we do through our organizations at a community level, and how evaluation can also contribute to change power dynamics. Today's session will be led by Yonatan Ghebray from the Network for the Advancement of Black Communities, NABC, as we know it. Yonatan is a Senior Director of Evaluation, Learning, and Quality Improvement at NABC, and he's also a mentor of the Healthy Communities Initiative. As a mentor, Yonatan has been working with some project recipients from the Healthy Communities Initiative, providing them peer support to some of the challenges and questions that they have or are exploring. And it is very special to have today with Yonatan two projects that actually have been collaborating with him during the last couple of months through our mentorship program. We've got Catherine Chamberlain from Erin Mills Connects. Erin Mills Connects is a community organization founded in 2016 that aims to have a vibrant and engaged community that can advocate for the needs of its members. With the purpose of filling the gap of COVID for students to gain access about the post-secondary education, they created a resource called Beyond High School, a guide to discovering your pathway to success. So Catherine is gonna share with us a little bit about the journey in terms of the development and the use and the evaluation of this resource. Together with Yonatan and Catherine, we also have Olivia Boyce from the Brandon Food Council. The Brandon Food Council is an organization that works to build fair and dignified food systems. And with the funding of the Healthy Communities Initiative, they have developed the Eat Eco Shop, which is a pay-what-you-can grocery store that rescues and distributes food that otherwise would have been destroyed. The shop is housed at a local senior center and provides support to populations experiencing various degrees of food insecurity. We are very much looking forward to hearing about Yonathan's framing about the topic and then about their experiences. You can find further information about both projects in the shared document. And I think, having said all this, we are ready to go. So I think over to you, Yonathan, to kick off the conversation and discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabriela, and thank you all, and thank you everyone who's joining us today. I'm very excited to be in this space to talk about evaluation and learning from more of a grounded, connected to the work that organizations do. So if I can have the slides that I wanted to guide our conversation. Thank you. So I just wanted to premise my conversation from just to give you a bit of my experience. I've worked in the last 20 years in different positions, from volunteer to the frontline staff to different capacities around management, but I've also worked with funders, both in terms of working from a funding organization, but also working funders as a consultant as well. So I have seen evaluation over the last 20 years and developed this understanding that the concept of evaluation and the way we talk about evaluation, I feel that it needs to shift. It needs to go back to the almost like reclaiming evaluation, because we as human beings are, inquisitive, by nature, and I think we do evaluation whether we like it or not, or whether we know it or not in our daily life. And I think part of this conversation is then how do you connect it to the work, and you find meaning in evaluation. When you're doing evaluation, you find meaning in the work that you're doing. So next slide, please. So one of the, again, I would like you to maybe take a moment to think, maybe, 30 seconds, that, for you, as you do your work, what's the purpose of evaluation? Why do we evaluate? What's the purpose? So I'm asking you, thinking about your work, and I know that in general, in terms of our relationship with funders and in terms of the work that we do in our organizations, evaluation sometimes may come a little bit more of a accountability driven, and we may not have the opportunity to really, learn and use evaluation as a tool for telling the story on the ground. So I just want you to take a moment and how you experience evaluation, or how you think about evaluation in your work. So I usually challenge, myself and all of us and the people that I work with, that if you think about evaluation and the purpose of it, here are, 4 areas. Facilitate improvement, generate and deepen knowledge in terms of what works and what doesn't work, and why and for whom, and then ensure accountability in terms of stakeholders. I know, again, in terms of my experience, and I think I would assume that for all of you, when we talk about evaluation and we talk about accountability, it's usually heavily leaning towards funders, or if you're funded by a government or by a foundation. So, there's that focus. But I think even within the stakeholder, accountability to stakeholders, I think the heaviness is more on the funder or on the government who's actually funding the project or the work that we're doing, the initiative that we're working on. And sometimes, the primary stakeholders, which are actually the people that we serve or we work with, or the communities that we serve and work with, sometimes that stakeholder becomes a bit of an afterthought. So I just wanted to also remind that the primary we are primarily accountable for the people that we work with in communities and individuals and families, and also in terms of informing the decisions that we make about programs or about initiatives, about the work that we're involved in. So what I would put a challenge to all of us, and I've been doing this for years, is that if you think about the purpose of evaluation, do you have anything, any reason or any purpose that's outside of this four? So give you 20 seconds to think. You don't have to respond. You might put your responses in the chat, but I just want you to think about what else. In the last many, many years that I have been asking myself and others, pretty much everything that we do or the purpose of evaluation kind of falls around these four areas. But I'm willing to be challenged, to find something that's outside of it. So that's the purpose of evaluation, essentially. So that's actually what creates meaning in terms of when we do evaluation, why we do evaluation, and there's a purpose behind it. So as I mentioned, because evaluation has been over the years more focused or leaning or heavy around accountability, then if we think about the four areas that I talked about, it actually captures both accountability to stakeholders, which is very, very important, but also learning from the work that we're doing in terms of what works, what doesn't work, developing promising and best practices, but really from the work itself, the work that we're doing on the ground, and then what we're actually collecting in terms of data. Not necessarily about meeting prescribed outcomes that are generated, for example, because of the funding relationship that we have. And I think it might be easy for me to say that, but I think it's the direction that I think collectively we need to move forward, because if you look back in the last 30, 40 years, a lot of the measures and reporting that we are asked to deliver or to submit generally focuses on outputs in terms of how many people we served, or sort of maybe things that we actually put out. And I think sometimes the so what question, what's happening as the result of the work that we're doing, sometimes is forgotten. So it's in the last, maybe I would say 5 to 7 years, that many funders and governments started to think about really instituting, the idea of, the so what question in terms of what are we actually changing, what's changing as a result of work that we do. So I'm not saying that there are many organizations and many projects that actually clearly identify the change that they want to see and really track it. But in general, I think our sector has been a little bit behind on this. And I think there's an aspect of responsibility for all government and funders and the community as a whole to actually really invest on building the capacity to actually, collect data that is informative, that's connected with the work on the ground, and really learn collectively together. Next slide, please. So this is kind of connected to the purpose of evaluation, but I think the reason why we do evaluation and why it's important is that I think ultimately it has to help us. It has to help us, the people that are doing the work on the ground, the communities and the individuals and families that we work with, but also those who are supporting the work. So, and it's important for us to think about that meaningful evaluation will actually help you to then meet the accountability, but also the learning needs of the organization. And if you're working collectively in a sort of a system or collaborative, then what are you actually learning from the work and what's changing? And ultimately, the shift that needs to occur is then, from focusing on accountability, but now focusing more on both accountability and learning, so that learning becomes a sort of a form of accountability. That for organizations, if they're actually doing meaningful evaluation, in terms of what I mentioned earlier, then they would actually have meaningful data that tells them that what's working, what's not working, and for whom and why, and then what do they need to change. And then it becomes actually relatively easy to report on the sort of what you're learning. So by default, you will be actually meeting every funders or every government or every stakeholder's need by doing that. So again, what we're pushing, the sector is then to think about evaluation more as a way for collective learning and collective accountability. Next slide, please. So what I want to do is quickly, so this is, I'm not going to take a lot of time, but just to show you that there's actually, many of you might be familiar with this, what's called the program evaluation and planning cycle. So if you can go to the next slide. So I'll just quickly show you. So if you look at this, it's like a cycle. It's not linear. And I think in paper, it might look, easy and kind of clear, but actually when you're starting, when you're doing the work on the ground, it's much more messier than this cleanly kind of articulated cycle. But this cycle can help in terms of really, as a compass in terms of where you are. So if you look at if we start from the needs and assets assessment, and then work our way to the right, to program design, evaluation design, and then designing the evaluation or data collection tools, those are actually the planning stage for any project or any initiative, whether large or small. That's the cycle that we start with. What are the needs that needs to be addressed, but also what are existing assets and gifts in the community or in the people that we work with that we can actually leverage to address the issues or the needs. And then we'd actually propose that intervention or prevention, like a program design or a service design. So we design what that is collectively with our key stakeholders, and then we design evaluation and develop the data collection tools so that we can collect meaningful data that can help us to learn and report. So that's actually the planning. So normally, again, ideally, you would have all of this before you actually implement the program. Even though generally, evaluation sometimes tends to be a bit of an afterthought, but this is actually a good practice to have all of it at the front end, so that when you implement the program, then you can start collecting and analyzing data that's useful for you to help you improve, learn and account, being accountable, ensure accountability, and then making decisions as you go along. And then part of the collecting data and analysis is then to report your findings, what you're learning with the key stakeholders, and then making the decision, and then you go back to the cycle. So that's a cycle that helps you to understand, from evaluation perspective, that this is kind of sort of the cycle that you go through. But the other thing that I want to point out is that if you look at generally what funders, whether government or otherwise, what they ask you in the application question, for example, or when they're actually working with you to support you, these are the sort of questions that they ask you from starting, like what are the needs, what are you trying to do, what are the community assets, and then they ask you, what are you proposing? And then how will you actually know if what you are actually proposing will work? And then in terms of reporting relationship, that they ask you to share with them what has been the results of your work. So both from the amount of work that you've done, but also what has changed and what are you learning from the work that you're doing. So that cycle, if you pay attention, they're almost the same. Your planning process and evaluation process is actually the same as what generally funders and foundations ask in terms of when you're asking for funding. So I don't know if there's another slide. I think that there might be another slide. Yeah. So I think very briefly, that if you want to simplify, what's measured in evaluation, think about whatever project that you're working on, whether it's big or small, that if you were to simplify this, I think Mark Friedman uses this, and I find it very, very helpful, is that in the work that you're involved in, you're doing something. So you can ask yourself, how much did we do with this project? In terms of, this is looking at outputs and the scope and reach of work. And then how well did we do it in terms of the quality of our services or our engagement. So this could be both from the perspective of the organization, which is actually have its own standard around what does a good quality service look like, but also from the perspective of those who are working with, those who are serving, for them to provide us around the quality of our work. And then as a result of this work that we're doing, are those you're engaging or serving better off? So if you can ask me three, big questions, big, evaluation questions, then it becomes relatively easier to identify what you measure and in the process, what you learn. So in my final, just my final thought is then, if we ground evaluation and connect it to the work that we do on the ground, I think we can start shifting the purpose of evaluation from it being transactional in terms of our relationship with funders and with government to something that's transformational, where transactional is that we are actually more reporting in terms of what governments and foundations need. But with transformational, actually it's what's the work itself and then how it's changing and what are the challenges, what are some of the promising ways that we're learning, that's something emerging. And then that helps in terms of collective learning, but also, making this work that we do in the community transformational. So at this point, I would like to bring my colleagues, Catherine and Olivia, and I think maybe we can start with Catherine. But I will actually ask you this question in terms of share a bit about your project, and then I'd like you, maybe I'll repeat this question later on. But what does evaluation mean to you? Thinking about the work that you've done in the project, and what you learn from doing evaluation or even thinking about evaluation. So if you can tell us a little bit about using these questions as a guide, that'd be fantastic. Catherine?
Okay. Thanks, Yonatan. That was a very nice explanation of evaluation, and I wish I had known that when we started this project. So I'd like to share right now what our project was about. So if I'm going to share the screen. And so a little while ago, probably the end of 2020, we were wondering what we should be doing about getting more confidence in our neighborhoods about how schooling worked and how post-secondary schooling worked. And it came up that there was a resource that was out in 2013 that was really good, but now that was out of print. So we mulled that over a bit, and then we started thinking this is a really good idea, because then we started hearing during the pandemic that the effects of kids missing days at school were having really bad effects on their long-term outlook for mental health. So we started a project, and it's now called Beyond High School, a guide to discovering your pathway to success. And thanks to the Healthy Communities Initiative for supporting Erin Mills Connects. So we did do a little bit of introduction to a completed project in English. We started off with English as a template, and we created an 80-page book, which is also a PDF, and it's on our website. It can be read online or downloaded, and links are active in the PDF. And if it's downloaded, students can scan QR codes to quickly find resources. Based on high school feedback from our high school students who were reviewers, and this is part of maybe our evaluation, we did interim check-ins with our audience to see if we were on the right track and what suggestions they had. So they suggested that we needed to create also a workbook so that they could work on it with a paper and pen, or they could input their answers into some of the exercises. So we wanted to meet all learners' needs. So just to explain what that resource is about, there's a section about kids learning more about themselves, their values, and their strengths. And we found that this is the first step of them being self-aware, how they are as a learner, and their interests and their passions, their values and strengths and needs. And section 2, a little bit more nuts and bolts about the opportunities out there in after high school. And the section also includes information on individual education plans and other accommodations, information on career trends and exploration, micro-credentials, and information on financial aid and budgeting. Third section, there are extensive resources for young entrepreneurs in this area, and many people who are willing to help young entrepreneurs. Section 3 also includes information on mentorship, networking, and experiential work opportunities. Section 4, this was one of the reasons we wanted to redo this resource, was to add more information about mental health. And even before the pandemic, we heard that mental health was in crisis in our area. We knew mental wellness could be a critical part of this resource. You have probably a pretty good idea of what the resource has, and that mental health is very important. So Yonatan, you mentioned about evaluation, and you're going to be very critical. You're going to meet with our group a little bit later, and to talk about how we can actually measure how many young people are making transformational decisions by using this resource in our area. Right now we have in place, how many people are going to be able to download it, how many people did download it, access different parts of the resource, but that actual taking it from the young people and their families to making changes and or making good decisions about their post-secondary life is going to be the part that we're going to be looking to you for. I think that's kind of encapsulates what our project is and our evaluation hopes.
Okay, so I think what I want to do is, I think maybe other people may have similar questions. So I wanted to hear from Olivia in terms of sharing her the project, and then maybe once you have a response, maybe you can kind of have a conversation, because it might be relevant to others as well. So over to you, Olivia.
Hi, thank you. Nice to be here. And what an excellent way to introduce the topic. I also would have loved to have gone over that before having done my evaluation or my prep for the proposal. So we have the food rescue grocery store here in Brandon. And there's been some slight pivots since I originally wrote that proposal. We had Everyone Eats, Pay What You Can meal program, which came out of COVID, which was a very transformational time. And we transitioned to this grocery store model. So the Everyone Eats program worked in partnership with Second Harvest, which is a national not-for-profit that rescues food. And we found that we had access to many items over and above ingredients that we needed for the meals. And we wanted to find a way to make these grocery items accessible to people while also covering the direct costs of labor, transportation, storage, all of these things that we were expected to meet that weren't being covered through the meal program revenue generation. So we wanted to continue advancing our work, building community, and actioning our values. So the food rescue grocery store was our solution. Originally, we were going to follow the Pay What You Can model, but we decided to move to having items with already with a list of, with a price listed, just to lessen the confusion. It is confusing to not know what the price is, right? You go into a store, you want to know what the cost is going to be. So we did transition to that. That was one of our pivots. So we opened in a little corner in a local nonprofit in December of 2021. And we transitioned to our own retail space in downtown Brandon that's set up like a regular grocery store in May of this year. So we sell the food that comes in at a discounted rate, approximately 25 cents on the dollar. and we incorporate other elements of community building along with our mission to rescue food. So this includes things like paying a living wage, providing opportunities for training, employment, volunteering for a diverse set of demographics. It's really important to us to bring everyone together to build community. We also support local businesses and startups. We have retail shelf space available for consignment vendors. So our goal was to rescue 10,000 pounds of food per month, and we are more than achieving that, which is amazing. And you have to remember, it's through just this tiny little storefront. So it's incredible that we've been able to move that much food, distribute that much food, bring that much food to Manitoba, much less small town of Brandon. We've got about 50,000 people in our city here. The most exciting food rescue that we've had so far was a semi-load of eggs. Originally, we had hoped to move 30,000 eggs, and we ended up having 200,000 eggs in the middle of February, and we didn't, it's like a little tiny corner, so we had people pulling up on the street and we were distributing it right from a warehouse. So really fun. We've got a team that says yes and is excited and passionate about helping people and solving problems. So yeah, we all kind of work over and above to make sure that those things happen successfully. We also provide, our reach, extends beyond just our own community. We have people that travel into Brandon to attend the store, people that come downtown that don't normally for the store. And we also provide large volumes of food to not-for-profits like the soup kitchen, the food banks in Brandon, as well as in the surrounding area. And going into evaluation, I guess, so when we were talking about, how we were going to measure success for this program, it really came down to deciding between two different things. Either our main goal is to feed people, or our main goal is to rescue food. And that's kind of a divisive topic because, everyone wants to feed people. It's very important. But by having feed people as our main goal, we would automatically become a food bank because we would just give away food. And then we would only be serving the people that were coming there for free food. And then the people that, don't attend food banks for stigma, shame reasons would not attend our store. And so by having our main focus be on rescuing food, we're able to meet people and reach people that, don't go to food banks, that need that extra support, need that extra help without that stigma, because there's a barrier to free. So that's kind of our bottom line evaluation measure there is pounds of food saved. And it becomes a mission, right? It becomes something that people can gather around and work towards as a community is rescuing food. And that's been really successful.
That's fantastic projects. And I have to admit that I've worked with many, and I think these are the two that kind of, also kind of shift me in terms of my thinking as well, in terms of because there's kind of deep systemic focus on them as well. So, just to address the question, you mentioned, Catherine, so first of all, I think we want to make sure that when we talk about evaluation, that I think we are conditioned to think about evaluation that someone is actually looking at our work and kind of sort of auditing or sort of judging the plan or judging the process. I think that's something that I think it's important to move away from because the work that happens in the community, that's where the work belongs, and people who are in the community, who work in the community, collectively understand, what it takes to change the certain things that actually are difficult to change, that impact our communities and the society in general. Mm-hmm. So it's also important to scope evaluation. So there are what you mentioned earlier around terms of how do the work that you've done actually help students to go beyond in terms of post-secondary, how does that help them? I think it's important to have a bit of a perspective that there are certain things that we do within, the work that we're doing, whether that's through the funding cycle or through the period of time that we're involved in that work. So I think it's important to differentiate between the impact or sort of the outcome that the project is expected to achieve, and what that achievement actually contributes to the broader change, which is actually beyond our control, because there are multiple players and multiple factors that impact. So it's important not to hold ourselves accountable in terms of the project to something that's actually beyond us in terms of impact. So for the work that you do in terms of supporting high school students around this depends also on many other things in terms of for their transformational achievement. So I think it's important in our planning process to actually really be very realistic and practical about what is within our control when we're actually working with a specific project. And then what does that contribute? So in your case, I think access to that information would definitely help in terms of people making the right decisions. So that's actually contributing to the broader transformational change. And I think in the case of Olivia's work, I think we've talked about how this could actually really be impactful in terms of system level change. You talked about food security in relation to climate change, for example, and climate responsibility. So I think it's in the design that we need to actually really articulate, including with funders and the people that are supporting us, that what's actually realistic given the amount of funding or the amount of resources you're actually inputting in this work. So it's important to differentiate the short-term outcome, which is within the life cycle of the project or the program, versus really looking at, okay, how does this then contribute? So the broader impact needs to be articulated in terms of contribution rather than attribution. I think this question might be for a lot of people have this question. I think I've heard it, many times in my work, that it's also actually, even if you're not trained, evaluation person, it's common sense that there are certain things that you can't really, have full control over something that's actually quite bigger, and that requires, the contribution of many other, including policy changes, major players that actually make decision on. So the key is to connect. How does my work connect to the mission of the organization, therefore connect to broader impact? So that's how we can articulate. And I'm also curious in terms of, I know, so you both of you said, well, I wish I had known this, earlier at the planning stage. I think that's something that I have been saying in my work, and I think I've also experienced it as a frontline worker and in different, middle management positions, where sometimes it's a collective, it's our collective. We need to shift collectively as a sector to think differently, because when funders are asking, for organizations to report impact on $25,000 that they provided, I think that's actually a bit far-fetched. So unless we are collectively asking that here is the issue that impacts our community, and if we start a conversation with funders and government and others, and we can say, what does it take actually to change this? Then evaluation becomes not about the money itself, but it becomes what it takes, not just in terms of resources, but also in terms of how we work and how we understand change. So you're not alone, and I think the sample size is small in terms of the work that I have done over the years. It's very few organizations that have the capacity to really plan for evaluation well at the front end and to be able to really learn. I think these are well-resourced, well-staffed organizations, but mostly small organizations and grassroots organizations don't have, both in terms of resources, but in terms of know-how. So part of it is then, I think, this healthy community initiative, I think, is kind of an eye-opener for me as well, in terms of how some small projects have done impressive, and I wish they would be supported more to actually continue the work. But organizationally, I think all of us, we need to actually really sit down and say, okay, what's realistic with what we, in terms of given that, what are the challenges in the community, and what does change look like, and then how can we actually realistically, identify meaningful outcomes that tell us that our project is making a difference, or that if it's not making a difference, that we're learning something to tweak and to shift so that it will make a difference moving forward. Then connecting that to how that actually contributes to our mission as an organization or as a group, and then how that in turn connects to broader change. So I think if we can do that, I think we'll be in a better position to speak about evaluation in a meaningful way. So I don't know. I'm wondering, maybe there's one question that I ask. I think we have probably a bit of time before I turn on to Naomi. I just I'm curious about, have you thought about, for example, some of the things that you've learned in the initial evaluation, however small it is, how you might use this in terms of the work of your organization, in terms of advancing evaluation, but the other thing is to think about what else do you need to do evaluation in a meaningful way, in a way that makes sense to you and the work that you're doing. Whoever is ready, you can respond to that, or we can open it up to later on to participants as well. So what are your thoughts?
I can say, Yonatan, that our group really benefited from having a check-in with our recipients, the recipients of the book, and really changed the course of some things from when we first made the application. And suggestions from youth that will make our output much more useful to young people, as well as, if it's useful, then it has that chance of going to the next stage, which you're talking about. So we talked to post-secondary education students and to high school students, and both had really good insights into what our resource needed to be.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Olivia?
Yeah, sure. So I'm pretty happy with the evaluation metrics that we went into this with. We had some project pivots and changes, but the outcomes haven't changed. So I would say that we've really stuck true to our core values, and I'm really happy about that. So as far as evaluation now, I would say we're gearing up for our next phase, which is hoping to open a few new grocery stores across Manitoba and expand our service offerings. Right now, we're limited to storage capacity. We have the semi come in on the weekends, and we have the weekend to distribute the food. So we've got 2 sea cans that are coming for long-term storage, so we can stock the store as we need. But we do need more long-term storage, and we need to be able to process food on site because we get commercial quantities. We need to be able to break that down, because otherwise, one person gets a massive amount and kind of spreads it with their family and friends. But to do that on site, and we attract a lot of people that are resourceful. They know how to use those odds and ends in the kitchen. And having a commercial kitchen on site, we can get people through their food safe, and we can have a kitchen there where people can bake and share that food, and we can put it through the grocery store and support people to at least pay their grocery bill, because they're going to cook anyways, and to sell that through the store and to share that with community. And we're also getting, I didn't mention this, we're getting donations of produce from the community, which is amazing, because we're able to support people that otherwise wouldn't go to the farmers market, because they are using all of their food budget. So they're able to access locally grown produce, and farmers are able to share it with them, which is amazing.
Fantastic. I think we can go on and on, and so maybe at this point I would like to ask to open up the conversation. So I would give it back to Naomi. Naomi, over to you.
Hello, hello. Thank you, Yonatan. That was amazing. Olivia and Catherine, both of you, thank you so much for sharing those insights. I have a couple of audience questions. So, thought I'd throw them out there and I'll sort of give you two. You can take either way. So from Wendy Keats in the chat was mentioning that organizational evaluation is also sometimes a big part of the evaluation process. And I guess do any of you have any thoughts on how organizational evaluation fits into the project evaluation process? And sort of extending upon that, or slightly adjacent, well, I can ask this one after. I'll just start with that.
So maybe since you're leading organizations, maybe I'll let both Catherine and Olivia go first, and then I'll share my perspective.
Catherine, you want to go first, or I'm going to take this one?
You go ahead, Olivia. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Organizational evaluation. So like staff evaluation, volunteer evaluation. I do take a bit of a hands-on approach, not micromanaging, but I can honestly say I'm friends with all of my staff and volunteers, and that makes it a nice place to be. I have people that go to work and they come on their lunch break to just stop and say hi and help. And so having that culture, it's not just evaluation, but it's really creating a culture that is community oriented and people oriented. And so when you're helping people with training or whatever it is, people are sad to leave, and you're sad to see them leave, but you're like, fly. And it's really amazing to watch, that personal growth and to be a part of that. And so we've never had an issue with retention or anything like that, because it's always just been like growth, right? And planned growth. So we've had a really good culture, and we have our suggestion box for customer complaints. One way we really do get a lot of feedback is Facebook. I don't know if anyone, or Catherine, I think you maybe mentioned social media or some sort of audience reaching out to. But we have had so much reach on Facebook. It's been astronomical. So I was really impressed with that, and been able to tackle inquiries and, people that were concerned that we were taking food from food banks or whatever it is, any myths that are going around, and to deal with that right off the hop.
For our organization, we're a collaborative. So we have just me as an employee and about 20 steering committee members who do an awful lot of work as volunteers. And so our evaluations are on our projects, and then every 3 years we've been doing evaluation of, are we on the right track with our community? So we have one community consultation that we're going to have in early 2023. That does help us to make sure that as a collaborative that we're hitting the right note for the whole area. And it also helps us to raise our profile in the community.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, both Olivia and Catherine captured it. I think what I would add is, it's the same process, except that organizational evaluation is focused on the mission. So the organization is the work of the organization, from financial, programmatic, HR, communications, all the things that you do is actually advancing the mission of the organization. So the process is the same. It's just kind of the focus of the evaluation is kind of much more broader when you're looking at organizational evaluation.
Sorry, I made the faux pas of leaving my mute on, but all of you gave great answers, so thank you for sharing. Now, a question we've actually had come up a couple of times in the chat is about qualitative versus quantitative evaluation. How do you typically take one or the other approach? Is the evaluation process quantitative, qualitative through survey, testimonial? How do you go about that? Yeah.
I can just simply say, just broadly, and then maybe I'll invite both to share their experience. So I think there is this, from evaluation field or research field, that quantitative tends to get a good rap, or a good respect compared to qualitative, because there's a tendency to assume that quantitative evaluation is more objective. So here's my view that there's no such thing as objective. Anything that passes through the thinking of an individual or group is always tainted, because we use our experiences and our views and all of that into the work that we do. So to say that it is objective is a bit of a fallacy. So there's two schools of thought that are kind of duking it out, while we are kind of focused more on the community and what is meaningful. So I would say both are important, because sometimes what you can capture quantitatively, unless it's supported by qualitative story, or the other thing is qualitative is a lot more empowering to community than quantitative, because people tell a story and a perspective, and you have an opportunity to learn much more broadly than when someone actually takes on choices. So a good mix, it has always been viewed as the most effective.
Yeah, and I can add to that, like, we definitely mix them together, right? So our average transaction is $9. That gets you about 3 grocery bags of food. And, we have a lineup from half an hour to 45 minutes before open. We could say we have a lot of people, or we say we have a lot of transactions, but by having those numbers there, it makes it more substantial.
We have both as well. We're hoping to have with Yonatan's help, with the evaluation, but was talked about, do give us the story behind, why people are saying certain things. And then we are going to roll out the resource to schools and settlement agencies and youth groups, and count the number of people who are willing to take the resource and introduce it to young people and to families. So that will be the quantitative. And then we're hoping from those people who get the resource, we can then also get their stories and how they have made a decision that may put them on a pathway they're more sure about going forward.
Amazing. Thank you. And also, I should have probably asked this at the start, but just if Yonatan or anyone can give just a quick distinction between the qualitative and the quantitative. Again, sure.
Yeah, no, so I think it's just the quantitative is just, I think it's the same. So the same question can be asked so that people, for example, if I say, the result of participating in this program or in this initiative, tell us your level of satisfaction. So you may have like a choice where people tick, right? But then giving meaning to that, for example, if they say I was extremely happy by my experience, then that's just a tick mark. But if you don't get a little bit extra, and why that is. So in giving you a qualitative information, you might actually find that the reason that they're happy is that your organization or the staff are very professional, the way they were treating the person, in terms of how let's say how they felt safe in the environment and in the learning space, how they were able to actually make connections with others. So when someone says my experience has been excellent, that's all you get. There's no meaning behind it. So that's the difference. People sharing from perspective, but also the information is much more richer, for qualitative. But again, equally important. I don't want to also kind of give the impression that I'm more, even though I am more interested in qualitative, but they're both important.
Can I add one more thing to that?
Please, yeah.
Just a reason why it's important. So when I'm thinking about my volunteers and the people that come in, it's deeply meaningful to them, right? And so I was at the store yesterday. I had one lady come in and she said, you know what, you guys keep me going. She said, I have my notifications on for your Facebook page. And she said, otherwise I have to choose between taking my medications or eating. And so when you have these personal stories like that, and we encourage people to share through text is how we mostly communicate for our operations team, our leadership team, and our staff team, and our volunteer team. We've got a few texting threads, but we encourage people to share those stories because that way, you know, everyone gets the message and we stay in connection and communicate really well that way.
Amazing. I think you've really, all of you have provided a lot of insight into the ways to sort of understand, rethink, reimagine the evaluation process. And I'm really excited to see where it goes. And I think just a last note, we did get a couple other questions in the chat. We will do our best to follow up with those after this session. But I would just say for Olivia and Catherine and Yonatan, are there any final sort of takeaways you want to leave as we sort of round out the session?
Maybe one thing that I want to say is I think, you know, that for all of us to think about evaluation from the person, the practitioner, so that you as an individual, you know, have that sense of, you know, is what I'm doing actually making a difference? So that's the most powerful than when you're actually responding to either a funder or your organizational leadership, but it's more like when it becomes the practitioner is the one that's actually reflective about the work. That's the most powerful.
And to place your project within the larger whole. You know, when you think about the world and you think about the things that you would change, like what is your project doing to achieve that? Where do you fit in? And what's your scope? And that way you know where you're going, right? You have a trajectory and you're able to communicate that. So get to your bottom why, get to your bottom line. You'll know what matters.
And to build on what Olivia said, our steering committee knows that we're working for the good of West Mississauga, but they also speak, how could this help the broader population of Ontario or even Canada? So it is that is also part of their thinking.
Amazing. Well, thank you for leaving us at the end with such, I think all three of you bless us, is really powerful stuff to think about. And we are running out of time now, so I am going to wrap up this session. So thank you, Yonatan, for hosting this session. It's amazing. You always have such insight to share. And to Catherine and Olivia for joining in and sharing your experiences and insights. We are always immensely grateful for the time taken by the people who work at these amazing organizations and doing these projects to come on and tell their stories and are so appreciative. And so just a couple final technical notes before I shut things down fully. With the purpose of continuing to learn and improve these sessions, it would be great if you could respond to a short survey that we're going to put into the chat. We will also share it in a follow-up email, and it will be shared in both English and French. It'll take only about 3 minutes. So again, if you can fill it out, we really appreciate it. And in fact, let me toss it into the chat now. So there you go. Additionally, we want you to know that the session has been recorded and that the link to the recording of the session will also be shared with everyone via follow-up so that you can share it with other colleagues who might be interested. Again, we have it recorded in French and English. And a final note, we are really, really excited to announce the launch of our national placemaking website, which has been a project in the works for a while. We are slated to go live on Friday, September 23rd. And so we will also share the link to that in the chat. The link isn't live yet, but in a couple days it will be. And so once you go there, you'll be able to follow it. And we will also send that in a follow-up. So after all of that, we hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you so much for being a part of it. And we look forward to seeing you at our next session.